Good evening and welcome to the Legion Cantina. In today's episode, we're going to be going through some data looking at which factions are winning the most games at the moment, and also going to be doing a quick overview of Hondo at the end as well. So yeah, let's get straight into it. Basically, I've just gone on Longshanks and taken kind of the last year's worth of data on sort of the games that have been played in Star Wars Legion, looking at the win rates, games played, etc. for the different factions. Going to go through sort of the overall win rates at the beginning, and then go through kind of the more detailed ones individually after that. Then look at secondaries and primaries and how those are doing, and finally which advantages you should be taking, things like that. Then finally, as I said, have a quick look at Hondo at the end because I didn't want to put him in his own video. But yeah, here we are, the overall win rate, and over the course of a year, the averages actually look pretty good. The number of draws is quite impressive. I'm not quite sure how people are drawing games with Star Wars Legion, but each their own. I guess it's a very small percentage, but it does still exist. But yeah, at the top we've got Separatists with sort of just over 9,000 games played and that 55% win rate. Then Rebels next. Their number of games played has climbed significantly since the last time I played this. I think possibly there's a correlation there with them becoming a bit more competitive and racking up more games on Longshanks. But yeah, they're in that second place with 53% win rate. Then Gar at that 50% with the most games played of any faction. Shadow Collective with about a fifth of the other factions in terms of games played, and then that second lowest win rate, and then Empire right at the bottom with that 44% win rate overall, but a decent number of games played. And I think thinking about like the last year in Star Wars Legion, this is a pretty fair reflection of what you'd expect. Obviously, there's been like fluctuations of kind of the competitive power in there with a couple of points changes and different models, units becoming more or less powerful over time. But yeah, I'm going to go through the individual factions, starting with Separatists and working way down, basically. So moving over to the Separatists, this is their win rate, and I've highlighted the June points change, which is where saw the Sleeper Cell nerf, saw a few Gar nerfs and things like that as well. A few buffs, to be fair, in there as well. So yeah, that's just when things were shaken up a little bit. Worth noting, for you can see this like where there's a massive drop off at the end. There are also massive spikes in other ones. Because September, when I'm recording this, it's still fairly early in September. There haven't been many games played, so I'm kind of going to be discarding that information effectively, but it is there if you want to use it to construct your own arguments, but I'm kind of going to be ignoring it. And what you can see is, I think, probably what you would expect. I think basically Separatists were around kind of 50% win rate sort of coming into the year, kind of December, January time. And then there's been a gradual rise from there to them becoming the most competitive faction in the game. And their win rate sitting sort of high 50s up towards 60%, I think is pretty fair. Like at the recent GT at Chopper Base in the UK, I think top 5 of the top 8 were Separatists. They're just the best faction in the game. They're not miles ahead, I don't think. And I think inevitably when people adapt to the idea of one faction being sort of significantly, well, not significantly, but more competitive than the others, counters start to appear and people start running different lists. So while Separatists may be the best ones, a faction for now, if there are sort of units that are at least able to counter them, bringing more ion. I think land speeders, for instance, are super strong into Separatists, which is maybe why we're seeing quite a lot of those at the moment. There's also some Separatist lists that counter Separatist lists as well, so there's a whole like diverse meta in there. But yeah, I think this is a pretty fair reflection, and I don't expect their win rate to go much higher than this. In fact, I'd kind of expect it to tail off a little bit. I don't know if we're going to get any more points changes, or we will be seeing more units being introduced. We're getting obviously the custom commanders for Gar and for Separatists soon, so maybe those will shake things up again a little bit. But based on where the power level of the Rebel and the Empire ones was, I'm not expecting them to have too much of an impact, but you never know. Grievous on Wheelbite could also throw things, but we'll see about that. And yeah, in terms of the battle forces, kind of what you'd expect. So experimental droids, 61% win rate, so probably slightly better than the average Separatist list, essentially. Again, that might just be because there's sort of a bias there in terms of maybe people bringing EXD think they are and are more experienced at the game, so just are likely to win a bit more. But yeah, it's not entirely unexpected, that 61% win rate. And then Invasion Force, I think, unfortunately, just isn't quite as competitive as sort of the rest of Separatist. You lose out quite a few sort of powerful units, namely Aquadroids, for instance, you lose out on, and the Geos as well. So yeah, it's not quite as strong in that regard. So yeah, that little bit low win rate there, and quite a low number of games as well, only 50. Moving down to my home faction, looking at the rebels, and again, this is kind of just the slight opposite of Separatists. Kind of actually saw the peak coming into the year, I would say, where rebels still had access to like some of their really powerful tools, and then gradually just been whittled down slowly over time. Still, I think probably the second best faction in the game. There's an argument between them and Gar, I think, at the moment, and actually, you can see moving into the more recent months, the win rate's actually dropped below 50% on a couple of instances. It has normally risen back above, but noticeably lower than Separatists in terms of its overall win rate. So I think it's pretty close between Gar and Rebels for second best faction in the game right now, and they both kind of offer different things. Personally, I found actually Rebels are fairly good into Gar, but maybe that's just the matchups I'm coming into and things like that. So yeah, Rebels second best faction, I would say, and the points change didn't actually impact the win rate that much. Obviously, I wouldn't like this data isn't like gospel, like it isn't. There is quite a lot of variance in there, and in some cases where you are seeing sort of small numbers of games played, as you can see with like the spike at the end, for instance, the data does get thrown off a bit. But yeah, just a slightly lower win rate compared to the start of the year, a gradual downward trend. Bright Tree Village, which last time I recorded this, I talked a lot of crap about. Turns out Bright Tree Village is really, really good, and I didn't know what I was talking about. So, having played into Bright Tree a couple of times now, I can confirm in the right hands, it is just an absolute nightmare to play into. Like, you really do feel like a stormtrooper on Endor. You're like, oh my goodness, I'm just surrounded by all these Ewoks, and I can't kill enough of them to stop them winning the game. So, yeah, they're really strong, and actually quite a high number of games played, up at 253 for a battle force. So, yeah, they are pretty strong. And Echo based defenders is perfectly solid. So like again, around that kind of average 52% win rate. I think again in the right hands, it's a pretty strong way of running rebels. I think personally for me, I think Brightree probably in the right hands. And if you've got the bank balance to fund it, probably the most competitive version of Rebels. And then just below that, there is kind of standard Rebels with access to land speeders, swoops, etc., etc. Bad Batch. And then I think personally for me, Echo Base is down at the bottom, but not a huge variation in there. Moving on to Gar, this is again, you can see just kind of fluctuated around that 50% win rate. There haven't been any huge peaks or any huge troughs. Noticeable that they were kind of flying high earlier in the year, so at that October time. I think that was probably around the time there was that original points change, so around like nerfing arcs, for instance, and bumping up Anakin's points. So that's probably where that redistribution comes in. And then since then, just been fluctuating around that 50% win rate. You can see recently there has been a bit of a downward trend. Again, maybe ignoring that final like colossal drop at the end. That will probably even out when there's more games played. But yeah, again, that 50% win rate for Guard doesn't really surprise me, and I think they offer something slightly different to Rebels, and you can sometimes really lean on those red saves. Like sometimes that is just a good way to play the game, but there's also times where those red saves will desert you, and I think over the course of an entire tournament, I think having to lean quite heavily on your red saves doing what they should just maybe isn't that reliable. Basically, with white saves, because they're costed into the unit, you're not that upset if they don't work out. Like you haven't lost as much. Whereas essentially, if you just get unlucky with, which does happen, like you can just roll badly in a game with Gar, that those sort of failed dice become that much more impactful. And so I do think for me, Gar just maybe has that slight weakness of relying more on those saves over the course of an entire tournament. So yeah, that's why maybe just that slightly lower win rate. And you can see for 501st and for the Wookiee Defender, Wookiee Defenders actually seems weirdly high for something I consider to be essentially trash. I'm not quite sure how its win rate is that high. Maybe it's just experienced players taking it and doing quite well, but I've played into Wookiee Defenders a couple of times and I haven't found it that strong. And I think Wookiees, which is basically what it's built on, are a very underpowered unit. So maybe I don't know what I'm talking about, but that win rate does seem weirdly high for Wookiee Defenders. Shadow Collective, no battle forces here, so just straight Shadow Collective. And worth noting, they have a significantly lower number of games played, so the variance is again significantly higher. Most of the sort of games on the sort of left hand side of the y-axis were going to around 300, 350. Shadow Collective, the absolute maximum was up at just below 75, so a really small number of games played. So that is why the variance is that bit higher. But you can see for the most part kind of sitting just under that 50% win rate with some quite significant troughs and a couple of peaks where it does just get above 50. But I think Shadow Collective is in a weird spot where it has, I kind of said this when I did my faction review, overall its unit quality is fairly good, but because it has less variety than the other factions, essentially it doesn't matter if your faction has lots of bad units in, as long as it has enough good ones to build a really good army. And I think that's what Shadow Collective loses out on, because I think its average unit quality is probably highest of any faction, but it doesn't have the kind of really big top end or the sort of really crippling low end that most of like the meta factions do. So that's probably why Shadow Collective is just that bit lower. But in the right hands, triple swoops, Mandos, it can still do something. But again, leaning on those red saves with those Mandos is probably not the way to go over the course of an entire tournament. Finally, languishing at the bottom, and crikey, we're hoping those commanders come in and make a real difference, is Empire. And yeah, they've just been really not very competitive for the majority of the time. I think there's only a couple of instances where it even gets close to 50% on those peaks. Everything else is down towards 40%. Obviously, again, got that recent spike, but that's probably due to the low number of games played. I imagine by the end of September that peak will have come back down. But yeah, this is just a fair reflection of Empire. I think it's not had many things given to it, and even the subtle little range trooper nerf which came in won't have had that much impact, but does just make one of Empire's maybe slightly better units just a bit less tricky, a bit less strong. So yeah, a bit sad for Empire. Hopefully, as I say, those unique commanders and things like that, Thrawn and Tarkin, etc., will kind of spice things up a bit and maybe give Empire a bit more oomph. But yeah, for now, I'm not really seeing it. In terms of win rates, Remnant up at 64%. Worth noting again, quite a small number of games played. There's a lot of variance in there, but give it credit, it is at 64%, and maybe there's something everyone's missing there. Then you got Tempest down at 53. Bit of a a hedge list, and yeah, it's very swingy, and yeah, 53% isn't bad. It does seem to be weirdly these battle forces all have significantly higher win rates than actual Empire. So maybe there is something there. Maybe there's in certain metas where Tempest people just don't have the tools to deal with it, and so that gives it a very high win rate. But again, I just don't think any of these for Empire from a competitive sense are particularly compelling. I think from a theme sense, I really enjoy them, but from a competitive sense, Empire just isn't quite there yet. But fingers crossed they'll get some new toys soon. Moving to primaries and secondaries, obviously no win rates here because one person wins and loses on each one, so just got the number of games played. Close the pocket at the top. Wow, sure, why not? Yeah, I'm not sure why close at the top. I mean, I guess if you're looking for just a melee mash and range 2 mash in the middle, which seems to be the way it goes in some metas, then maybe that's the way to go. But yeah, I personally don't play that many games on close, so a bit of an interesting one. Then coming in second, got Bunker Assault, which I think makes a little bit more sense to me at least. Like, that's less of a kind of just charge into the middle and try and control that objective. Yeah, I personally, I think I called Bunker boring in the last one, and I kind of stand by that a little bit. But yeah, it's fine. And I'm just not a fan of the ones where you deploy in the middle, and I can never quite explain why. But every time I see them come out, I'm just like, oh, that's a bit dull. Whereas like when I see a breakthrough or recover the research or shifting as well, just a little bit of a curveball in there, I really enjoy. Recover the research. I would really expect recover to be significantly higher because nearly every list can handle it, and we'll see this later when we come on to talk about the greens and to an extent the secondaries as well. I just figured recover would be more of a hedge one that appeared in more matchups, but maybe people are just vetoing it out because they know their opponent's list can handle it, so they may as well have a shot at getting one they can't handle. So breakthrough next. Breakthrough much more of a kind of hedge one, and I think this one is one of the scenarios where actually if you tool your list in a sort of more gunliney, more passive way, breakthrough is much more difficult to handle. So I'm not surprised that one is a bit lower. I'm surprised it's only third lowest, but it's only marginally higher than intercept and shifting. So maybe something in there. Intercept feels weirdly low for me. I personally would have if I had to guess, I would have said recover at the top probably, and then intercept and bunker for me probably would have been next. and then would have seen like close and shifting and breakthrough, because for me shifting and breakthrough are the more niche ones and makes sense why they're a bit lower. But for intercept to be down here, I don't know, I think it's quite interesting. Maybe people don't like playing it. And finally shifting at the bottom, again, this is probably the weirdest one, and I can see why people don't like this one, and there are definitely some lists that lean a lot more towards it. If you have back market units that are happier to sit on a back objective and blink away, this makes a lot more sense. So if you are hedging toward more kind of close the pocket, in your face kind of style, I can see why this one gets vetoed away quite a lot. Secondaries, there's one that's way ahead of everything else, which is sweep and clear, which again maybe leans a bit towards this kind of, like, I was about to say close the pocket, but close the pocket, there's not really much fighting around home objectives, but maybe it's the ability to score that kind of home objective on sweep and clear early in the game. Yeah, I don't know, that seems weird, but it is very high up at 5,200 games, so yeah, not one that makes a huge amount of sense to me. Next is recon mission. This one I think makes a lot more sense because increasing, well, Bad Batch and Aquas and things like that can just sit and reliably score every turn, and even if you kill them, you can just pick it up and go again. So this is, I think, more of a kind of hedge one, essentially, one that if it comes out, nobody's going to be that happy, nobody's going to be that sad, unless you're really building towards a gun line, in which case you're probably not doing that well anyway. Next would be mark targets. Again, this one, bit of a default, as long as you've got some relatively cheap chaff that can sit at the back. I've spoken about this a couple of times before, then you're absolutely fine on this one. So yeah, not mad at mark targets. Same for surface scan. In my head, surface scan and mark targets are really quite similar in terms of the way they tend to play out. So yeah, those two make sense to me. And then definitely these two as kind of the lower ones make sense to me, because bring them to heal is quite niche. Basically, you're trying to build that suppression. So if you're vehicle heavy, for instance, and you're likely to be able to hide one unit back to be able to avoid that suppression, then bring them to heal probably makes a bit of sense. Destroy enemy base, I think, is one that again is quite polarizing in the same way that bring them to heal is. Like, if your list is not tooled towards it, then you really want to get rid of it, because, you know, if you're facing into swoops, speeder bikes, mandos, whatever, stuff that can really get aboard across the board quickly, you really don't want destroy enemy base in there, because you're going to have to commit something to be really passive and sit at the back. So that makes sense. Finally, my favourite bit is to talk about the win rates of the advantages. My goodness, there is a huge variation in the number of games played. So advanced intel, I think this should be the most picked one, for what I hope is obvious reasons. Essentially, you can see here, it's the only one and continues to be the only one with above 50% win rate. And it is always powerful. It is always good. So that is why advanced intel is so strong. I think it's the only one that is guaranteed to have a positive impact on the game. Cunning deployment, I would say, is probably the next easiest one to have an impact on the game, but the impact of advanced intel is significantly higher. So it makes sense to me why it's up at 61% win rate. And the reason the number of games I think is lower than cunning deployment is that people don't want to let it through, because people know its win rate is super high. So that makes sense to me. Next one is, in terms of win rate at least, is ordnance. This I find a little bit tricky to explain. I mean, we're seeing more vehicles, and the suppression from this is actually underrated as well. I like a turn one ordnance. I think it can really mess with people sometimes, but to me, it makes sense. This is about 50% win rate, and it's fine. Ordnance is quite forgettable. Kind of same for cunning deployment, really, unless you're kind of really built into a bit of a synergy kind of list, which, now that I say it, there is actually quite a lot of units that can pick up that synergy. So whether you're running, you know, rebels, for instance, straight away with their dodge synergy, and then you don't even have to, I was going to say EXD, but as long as you've got a super attack or even two super attacks, then you can basically have two dodges ready to go with your cunning as soon as you want them. So that's really good for separatists. And then Gar, obviously, with clone token sharing, just having those dodges means that everything has a dodge, so you can share around quite effectively as well. So there are definitely, it's basically only Empire and Shadow Collective that don't really have any synergy. Weird that. Yeah, so essentially kind of makes sense to me why cunning is the next one. And you can see the number of games played is by far the highest for the three default options: intel, cunning, and ordnance, the ones that people always take. So that makes sense to me. Next one, strafing run. In terms of win rate, it's quite similar to ordnance, but just a little bit worse, I think, and you can see that from the number of games played, but not a terrible win rate. Like, you can definitely do worse than this. Fortified position, I think this is the worst one, and I don't think it's that close. You so rarely need extra cover. I mean, the only I'm saying that maybe I'm taking like speaking from a position of like somebody who, for the most part, plays on fairly balanced boards. If you're playing on an unbalanced board with not much cover, Fortified gets better. If you're playing on a correctly structured board with a decent amount of heavy cover and a decent number of LOS blockers, you shouldn't need additional cover. So I can see how in maybe more casual and thematic games where maybe there's less cover and the board is less balanced, Fortified becomes better. But for the most part, I don't think it's that compelling. So personally, yeah, I would just get rid of Fortified. And then Garrison. This should be for me the fourth option, but the problem is Garrison is only good in a select number of lists. I've spoken about this before. It tends to be good if you're running big B2s, for instance, or the Mega Squads for clones are the two that really spring to mind. And in that situation, I think people won't let it through. So I think even if you are putting this in your deck with the hope of hitting kind of those units to give them that synergy, you then also have to get it through. And I think most of the time people will veto that away because if it is on a board where that is powerful, then having that unit basically get what is normally you can think of like Scout 2 or Scout 3 and a dodge onto the board is really powerful. So I can see why people then veto that away. So I think Garrison falls into this really unfortunate position of in most lists it's really bad. In the lists it's good in, it is then in the situations it's good, so powerful that people just veto it away. So that's why it's also not seeing many games. So I think Garrison's an unfortunate spot. I do think it's good, but as we can see from the win rate, I think the only times it's being let through are when it's bad, and then it doesn't have any impact, and you kind of wasted your advantage. So I can see why Garrison's in an unfortunate spot. But yeah, no huge surprises there. I think it's kind of what you would largely expect. It is a shame that Empire and Shadow Collective continue to be the kind of just bottom end of the competitive side of things, and to be honest, unless, as I've said, the new commanders and the new pirate stuff, although can you even take the pirate stuff in Shadow Collective? I don't know if you can. Unless that stuff is super impactful, I don't think I can see this changing very much. The other thing that is coming, hopefully in the near future, are the new scenarios, and hopefully there's more kind of stuff that suits a gunline style list to give Empire a bit more of a shot, because then you can kind of warp your deck a bit more, and yeah, that's the hope, but we shall see. Just feel bad for Empire and Shadow Collective. I think everyone else is doing fine. Would like to see not Shadow Collective, Separatists pushed down just a little bit, but to be honest, I don't really hate playing into Separatists that much at the moment. Like, when I see Aquadroids, a little bit of me, dies inside, but it's not that catastrophic, and you kind of get used to playing into them, so it's not as tilting as it used to be. I'm actually in the camp where I find Bad Batch more frustrating than Aquadroids now, but I think it's still a pretty close run thing, and it might just be that I've been running into more Bad Batch recently. But anyway, that's a video for another time. Finally, I never talked about Hondo. He completely passed me by that his command cards and abilities had been released, so going to talk about him now. And yeah, his point total's been confirmed 85. He can go into all the factions, which I think is really nice. And I think he's good, but I just don't know which lists he fits into. So the X on his card refers to the number of pips on your command card. So on turn one, you would get Arsenal 4 if you really want that. I don't know how that could ever be useful, but we'll see. Disengage. Disengage is great, and I think weirdly, I think Hondo's going to kind of play a bit like Jin based on his kind of range of abilities. Independent dodge X. So again, you're racking up 4 dodges on turn 1. My mood is based on profit. I don't know what that is. That might be the thing that gives the X on his pips on his command card, but I'm not sure on that one. Nimble and reliable X again, so number of pips on the command card, and uncanny luck X. So he feels like a sort of blend between Cad Bane and Jin with less of both. But Arsenal X, so as long as you're not playing a 1 pip, in which case you get Arsenal 1, which is just a normal attack. If you're playing, if you've got Arsenal 2, he's throwing 6 black and a white, because it's versatile, you're nearly always going to be able to use that. And then you're normally getting a couple of surges, you're getting independent, probably on average 2 or 3 dodges again, depending on your command card. Getting that nimble, getting that disengaged, that reliable, like, I can see how he could have a role in lists that need that as a, like, annoying kind of melee blocker objective player. Because again, I feel like Hondo can get really good value if he can clog up a larger threat. So, like Bad Batch, for instance. If he can get Bad Batch in melee, and he gets like 3 dodges, for instance, and he's got the nimble, and he's got uncanny luck and all this stuff, he could actually make a he could really slow them down and stop them. And the best bit is that once they've attacked him, assuming they've gone first, even if you go on standby, for instance, he could then just jump out and then go off and score an objective. Like, I think there is something there, and there's something to be said for getting like a load of dodges in one go, for instance. I think it's it's tricky because there's no exemplar and there's no aid. So this is, for me, feels a bit like when I used to run Layer and Wicket before Layer had exemplar. Like, you would have all these tokens, all these dodges, which was brilliant, but the problem is there's not a lot you can really do with them, and because they're dodges, not aims, they are inherently reactive. So you have to put your opponent in the position where they are almost forced to attack you in order to get value, and it's tricky because he is only 5 health. He doesn't currently surge unless obviously you get the reliable. So yeah, like, on the face of it, 5 health with no surges is not good, and you will be relying quite a lot on that reliable X. But I think he has potential to be a really annoying kind of melee blocker. I think 85 points on the face of it, I haven't seen the other pirate stuff yet, is probably a little bit expensive. I think if it'd been released at like 75 or 80, I could maybe see it, obviously just a little bit more, but I don't think he'll be terrible, and I really hope he does get tried out at least, because he does look like he'll be a really fun kind of unit to have around. That's just good business, seems really fun, and again, I think is a bit similar to CAD's. Is it I'm in Control, where you can like dump suppression on people in sort of that area around him. I think Ventress can do it as well, maybe. But yeah, it just seems like quite a fun one. I think there is potential for some kind of weird shenanigans, but yeah, it seems really good. And again, if you're looking to really annoy and frustrate somebody, like move into them, disengage, steal their tokens, like that just feels really good. I can definitely see that kind of, that theme for Hondo of, you do that move, steal someone's tokens, then keep on moving maybe into another unit, and that's just super frustrating for your opponent. Like, if they set up a super attack, you move into them, and then you could even take a standby, for instance. Like, there's so many options in there. So again, really seems like a really nice thing to have around. The weakness, obviously, is he wouldn't get his independent, which again is that kind of Cad Bane problem. Again, if we still had comms relay, maybe he would be better, but it's tricky to say. I have to see him on the board. And then stories, so many of them true, just seems like some really nice token synergy to have. And yeah, I think you will be stacking up quite a few suppression if you use this multiple times. But for units that have teamwork, and straight away I'm thinking, well, this can't work with Ahsoka and Sabine, but Han, Chewie, Leia, Wicket, etc. Like, this isn't a bad little token generator to have, and if you have orders, um, you don't have to have orders on them. Like, as long as you're just within one of Hondo, like, that could generate you some really nice dodges and some nice aims and things to again share with that exemplar. I He is a bit of a weird kind of token basher, maybe a bit similar to how Padme used to be in Gar, and it's just whether or not he fits into lists that actually need that. I think, talked about the operative slot before. He's really going to struggle to fit into Rebels. There's just too many good options there. There is more of an argument for Empire, and again, if you're using him to generate aims and then be an annoying blocker, like, him and Callus could be a fun combo as kind of budget melee blockers essentially. And yeah, it's not bad. Like, you do have to surrender quite a lot of order control when you're using him, but again, if you're getting those tokens, it's not bad. I think Gar, like, the combo at the moment seems to be Padme and Bad Batch. Hondo could be fun in that list, but again, it just feels like you're probably spending, if you're spending 85 points on something, you probably need it to be a bit tougher and maybe be a bit more flashy than Hondo is. So I just don't quite see it myself. But again, prepared to be wrong on that one. I've made wrong calls before. So looks super fun, but I just don't think we'll be that competitive. And yeah, that's Hondo. Hopefully we'll see him on the table soon, and looking forward to the pirate release in the tank and things like that. I think potential for a really cool little faction in there. Thank you so much for watching. In terms of what to expect in the channel in the sort of the coming weeks, going to get back on the sort of list competition thing. I kind of just put that to one side. I basically lost a bit of motivation to carry on doing it, but that motivation has returned, and I will carry on making those videos soon, and we'll put the polls up on the channel as per usual in the coming weeks. Also, on the lookout for any new releases and things like that, like when we see the custom commanders for Gar and Separatists, I will join the hordes of Legion creators who churn out the video as quickly as they can in order to harvest views, but I might be a little bit late on that one. We shall see. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. Like, subscribe, etc. And I'll see you for the next one.